flat minor. You can see it relates in a way. So F major, B flat minor. But was very far from the home key, which is A flat major. So that's one of the quirks. Hope. Did anyone actually understand what I was just talking about? Or? Okay, good. Just a little tangent stuff. But anyway, but it was, yeah, so we start off with this lament, or this slow introduction. And it goes like this. See, it's very unstable, tonality-wise. It doesn't set on any key. And now we have this recitative. Very unusual to have a recitative in an instrumental work. A recitative is between, in opera, you have the arias, and a recitative is like a spoken bit in between the arias. But here Beethoven introduces a recitative for the piano. It's not the first time he introduced one. There's, in his Tempest Sonata, there's a similar one. Similar here, we have this. And you notice too, Beethoven marks that we use the pedal. For usually when you pedal, you have to change pedal at each harmonic change to make. If you don't do that, the music sounds too blurred. But here, Beethoven deliberately wants a blurred sound, so you hear, you can hear all the overtones. And that's a very unusual piano writing back in the. Now it's not unusual, but back then it was quite unusual.
Also, the pedal is the thing that makes it.
Yeah, yeah.
That was making it a bit.
Yeah, yeah. And each time there's a new harmony, you lift up the pedal, generally, but here you don't. So that's.
Yeah, just for something new.
Yeah, yeah. Beethoven the radical. And then go on, so. Now we have this repeated A note. Again, it's very unusual just to have a note repeated like that all the time.
It's quite experimental.
Yeah, yeah. And there's two, you can see this passage in two ways, I think. Beethoven at this time was very deaf. He had trouble hearing. And one interpretation of this is Beethoven's last attempt at hearing something. So notice, it starts off quiet. Pressing, can I hear? And he can't hear anything, so this dies off. So it's very powerful, that moment.
Is that documented?
Well, that's one interpretation. I heard.
Oh.
It wasn't Beethoven saying this.
Right. It's like he wasn't totally deaf like for the majority of his life, was he?
No, at the end of his life, it was, and now he was, trying to. Can I hear something? No, I can't.
Why
So,
did Beethoven become deaf? How did that occur?
it was some hereditary disease of the
Oh.
bones, sort of the
Oh,
bones.
yes.
Sort of,
Oh,
it's hard to talk about it, but the bones sort of shrunk and
Okay.
hurt the auditory. It wasn't because he was listening.
It wasn't
to
industrial deafness.
No.
Oh,
It
okay.
was hereditary.
Okay, that's
Too much
I
deafness. Too much symphony.
No.
Yeah, well, that's what I was
Had his
thought.
stereo, had his headphones on.
Smetana got deaf from syphilis as well.
Okay,
So a lot of these composers got deaf not from hearing loss, but just
Viruses.
viruses,
Yeah.
hereditary. Another interpretation of this repeated note, and it's my interpretation, is that it represents Beethoven's heartbeat. Because Beethoven was very sick at this stage. So it almost represents his bare life. Nothing else, just his heartbeat. Because when he was composing this, the doctors thought he was going to die at any moment. He didn't die, he lived on for a few years, but he was very sick, and that sort of represents, that very fragility of life, that repeated A note. So a lot of power just in one repeated note. So I'll continue on. Now this introduction's finished, and now we go to the main melody, if you will. The clandestine Gesang, the tearful song. On for a few more bars, and then we have this very eerie ending at the end, very quiet. So it ends very, very silently, almost fades out. So now you know the structure, so now I'll play through it. Any questions first, I should say? Yeah. Hard to talk after playing. And there's so much. I mean, this is just one sonata. There's so much in Beethoven, especially his late period, where he just bears all. No wonder this music was so unappreciated in his time. People just didn't understand it, and it took to the modern period for people to understand.
So Rudolf, where would, from a timeline point of view, when would he have written that in regards to a timeline with his symphonies? Before the ninth, obviously.
Yeah, before it was composed 1821, wasn't it? And the Ninth Symphony was 1825. So, but it's a late period work. So
Yeah,
he finished his eighth, and then wrote a few string quartets and a few kind of sonatas, and then his Ninth Symphony.
Towards the end of that middle period.
Yeah. This is the late period.
So it's the start of the late period.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. And there was like I said, with the recitative and the repeated, a lot of innovations that weren't in Beethoven's time. That's why the music is so. A lot of people had difficulty understanding it.
Seems like that repeating, pulsing note and chords seem to go throughout the whole song.
Yeah. It's very. It's like a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Kind of very soft. And, as I said, Beethoven was near death at the time, so he was, and this could see this like as an end to life, really.
Wow.
But the sonata goes on, and there's a fugue and it ends very massively. I can't play the massive bit, otherwise I would do it. But it doesn't end in despair, it ends really triumphantly. But here, in this moment, there is great despair and great sadness.
How long would that creation of the piece have taken in terms of him sitting down and we're talking months? Yeah.
Depends on the composer. Some composers were very fast. Mozart could dash off symphony just like that. Beethoven was a very slow composer. A lot of sketches exist. It took him many years. I think this took him about half a year to compose. But there was he was writing some other music as well at the same time. So, but he was a pretty slow composer. He wasn't natural. He wasn't. That's why he wasn't a child prodigy either, like Mozart. He wasn't naturally. Well, maybe he wasn't naturally gifted, but it took a lot of energy for him to express himself. So that's why he created all these masterworks at the end of his life, not particularly at the start of it. Yeah. It's very useful.
The thing that interests me is, when they're doing, when they're creating the music for an orchestra,
Yeah.
in those days they would have had to